Hello and welcome everyone. We're thrilled to have you here with us today. My name is Silvana Cisneros and I'm the network's lead of the Wellbeing Project. And I'm here to introduce our wonderful speakers, Peggy Callahan and Douglas Abram. Peggy is an anti-slavery activist, filmmaker, producer who has spent 20 years fighting modern-day slavery and decades producing films on poverty, foster care system, death penalty, racism, homelessness, and slavery. She is also the co-director of the film Mission Joy, Finding Happiness in Troubled Times. Doug is the New York Times best-selling author of the Book of Joy, along with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He's also the president of Idea Architects, a media development company helping visionaries to create wiser, healthier, and a more just world. Welcome our wonderful speakers, Peggy and Abram. I am thrilled to be here and it's an honor. And I will now hand it over to Sharon and Parker, who are our amazing hosts for today and will lead the conversation. Thank you very much. Sharon, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, I believe we're gonna start with getting to see a trailer, a little, very small section of this film. So that's out of my hands because I don't have the technical know-how.
Let's see if we can have our production office share the
3,
video.
2, 1.
Thank you.
We are going to be free! Sex. Did you say that? You are a monk, remember? I've sometimes said to him, the cameras are on us.
Honestly, the energy between them is 8-year-old boy.
You are mischievous.
What is the purpose of your visit, sir?
Just enjoy our friendship and talk about joy.
I don't think you could find two people on the planet who are more different than the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. One grew up in absolute poverty, the other grew up in a 1,000-room palace.
Unfortunately, that person is Christian.
Unfortunately, he's a Buddhist.
There's a lot of shared background. Both of them have deep history of struggle against authoritarian systems.
The Tibetan people are being exterminated. Their culture and religion are being stamped out.
Age 24, I lost my own country.
Amid tear gas and police dogs, Desmond Tutu led a people against apartheid.
When people decide to be free, absolutely nothing is going to stop them from becoming free.
You can overcome the most horrendous circumstances and emerge on the other side, not broken. When you say you are pursuing happiness, you are not going to find it.
Happiness isn't just something that feels good. Happier people, they're physically healthier, they have stronger immune systems, they even live longer.
Ultimate source of happy life, inside, not outside. You really become something quite special.
Yes.
I think at the time of my death, I will remember you.
Thank you.
Well, that's just a little taste of a really, really magnificent film. I had the privilege to watch the whole thing the other day and so delighted to be here with Peggy and Doug, who were prime movers behind this film. Before we turn to our two wonderful guests, Sharon, it's good to be back with you. We've been doing this for Wellbeing for a couple of years now, And at some point, I just need to say, we've got to stop meeting like this.
Oh, no.
I don't know when that day will come. I hope it's a long way off. I'm going to ask you, Sharon, if you would up front lead us in a meditation, please.
Sure, I would be so happy to. If we could just more fully gather our attention and our presence, can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. You can start just by listening to the sound of my voice or other sounds that may be predominant. And unless you're responsible for responding to the sound, see if you can just have it wash through you. And feel your body sitting. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. And space touching you. Usually we think of touching space. We think of like picking up a finger and poking it in the air, but space is already touching us. It's always touching us. We just need to receive it. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can move from the more conceptual level, like, oh, fingers, to the world of direct sensation. Feeling pulsing, throbbing, warmth, coolness, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And then bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath, just the normal, natural breath, wherever you feel it most strongly. The nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. You could bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just fully here for a moment. And then notice in the question of joy, how does that feel? To be that fully present. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. So Peggy and Doug, it's just lovely, lovely to be with you and with this amazing, beautiful film you've made. I want to start us out by asking you to say a bit about what brought each of you personally to the topic of joy and to the making of this film. And along the way, when you use the word joy, what are you pointing to in our lives and in the world? Just open it up. Peggy, maybe we start with you.
Well, from my point of view, it's all Doug's fault. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy I got included. So actually it was Doug who was working on this project. He was going to do this book, and I don't want to tell Doug's story, but and he called me. He left me a message on Thanksgiving. I don't know if you realized it was Thanksgiving, and said, I got a project. You're going to love me forever. Call me. And, so I called him the next day and I'm like, I'm going to love you forever anyway. What? Do you want to come to India? And I work with India a lot in the anti-slavery movement. Do you want to come to India? And I'm going to interview the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and we'd like to record it. You know, at the risk of being too simple, duh, of course I want to come. And then it all unfolded from there. And so Doug, you should tell your part of it because it's beautiful.
Well, thank you, Peggy, and thank you, Sharon and Parker and Silvana. And I want to, first of all, hola Bilbao, hola Comunidad Wellbeing. On behalf of the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu and his legacy, I want to just thank you all for the privilege of being here and to share this film and their wisdom with you. As Peggy said, I did rope her into all of this, and it is my fault. And the project for me actually began many years before, because I had the profound privilege of working with Archbishop Tutu for over 2 decades before he left us this December. And it's always a little bittersweet watching the trailer and seeing his wonderful, loving, smiling face. But it's always really inspiring to know that this film will carry his legacy on for generations to come. So I had the privilege of working with him on many of his book projects, and we were in South Africa for one of the birthday parties that I had been going to in South Africa. And I was there with the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation, and we were talking about the possibility of the two of them working on a book. And so I turned to Archbishop Tutu, and we call him Arch or Father. And I said, "Hey, Arch, you want to do a book with the Dalai Lama?" And he said, "I'd do anything with that man." And so he wrote to the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama later confessed to me when I met him in Washington, D.C. before we went to Dharamsala to make the book and the film. He said, "You know, when I got the letter, I got a little excited." And I guess if you're getting the Dalai Lama a little excited, you're doing something right. So that's how the film came in, the book came into being. And I'll have to tell you candidly, you know, Peggy said to me, you know, I don't know if two guys talking is going to make a great film. But it was just magic to watch, as you see in the trailer, seeing the love between them, the joy, the playfulness, and just seeing the profundity of their lives and what they have done to maintain joy in the face of amazing opposition and oppression is just so inspiring. You asked Parker about the meaning of joy and what we mean by joy. And you know, one of my jobs was to go to the scientists and to actually, they asked me, they said they don't want this to be a Buddhist or a Christian book and film. They want it to be a universal project for everyone. And my job was to kind of check what they were saying against what the scientific literature said and see if it contradicted and confirmed. So the science on joy was really fascinating. And really, joy can be anything from the enjoyment of a good meal or a good song, all the way through the kind of spiritual qualities of joy in being that these two men demonstrate. And really, we were there to bottle that up. We were there to say, how do you take a fleeting emotional state like joy that comes and goes like a butterfly on our shoulder and turn it into a character trait, to something that you can access in your life, not always, but on, you know, as a fundamental characteristic. And there's so many things, I'll just say one last thought, which is there's so many things I think in our world right now that seem unjoyful and that people are struggling with. And I think that joy is our birthright, and maintaining that joy in the face of oppression, opposition, is one of our conflict violence, hatred, prejudice, that holding on to that joy, that is a revolutionary act and part of the solution of doing the work of our world.
Well, one of the things I really appreciated about the film that both of you created together is the way it keeps interweaving, sort of on the Mobius strip, joy and suffering, the light and the dark, the laughter and the friendship with the struggle and the pain. So special thanks for that, because otherwise I think the film would not have spoken to me or to as many people as it's going to speak to.
Thank you.
One of the great things about these men talking about joy and joy in troubled times is you cannot dismiss their life experience, right? So many times people would say, yeah, but you don't know what's going on in my life. And that's true. You know, we don't always know what's going on in someone else's life. But when you see, even in those short little montages we put together, what they experienced, and you know, we couldn't put this much of it. And then hear them say, and yet you can practice these things, and yet you can still have joy. And we're not saying you won't have pain. That's not true, because they're inseparable, right? And I think they were the perfect people to tell that story.
I agree. I mean, it was so impressive. And I've been thinking about suffering in the last 5 minutes a lot, because I think for so many of us, depending on our own conditioning, you know, cultural, family, personal, it's been very hard to open to suffering. And whether it's our own or someone else's, there's so much shame and there's so much distress surrounding that has been a very important and healing thing. And it's also very hard to open to joy, I have found, because especially in the face of a world in disruption and turmoil, people feel they don't deserve it, or it's wrong, or, you know, we have to not be conflict avoidant and not be pretending, you know, everything is so great. And that's why I love these two people who have been through so much and so much adversity, being the champions of joy, because it's so clear that it's not going to erase the difficulty or the pain of life, but in a way it can surround it. It can be the holding environment we create together and within ourselves to be able to be with everything that happens in a very different way. So it was great. And also, I'd have to say, it was so amazing to see them in friendship, because that's really, of course, what the movie is revealing. And it was like, they are like two little kids. Who knew?
You know, Sharon, people who have known them for 50 years have said, particularly around the Dalai Lama, that they had never, ever seen him that way before. And it's not like they're not joyful a lot in many different aspects, but for people who have been around them to say that is something, right? 40, 50 years, you don't see them that way.
It's really true. And I think that the film reveals their humanity. I mean, I think most of us kind of see them as these global icons, these extraordinary, luminous figures, but you really see the road they took to become who they are. And you see in the mirror of their friendship, their humanity in a way that is very, I think, we don't otherwise see. And it's just so deeply, I think, inspiring, even more inspiring, because they're not out there as some kind of lofty saints. We see them as connecting to us in a very deep way. And I think that, just to speak personally for a second, for me, part of the journey of this project for me was, I think, having grown up with a parent who suffered from depression, I felt like my job was to run from sorrow and, seek happiness. And I think, in our American Constitution is, the pursuit of happiness. That's one of our fundamental God-given rights. And I think what I learned from working with them on this book and film was that joy and sorrow are two sides of the same coin. They're inseparable. And that, as you were saying, Sharon, it is hard to, it's almost cynicism is easier than joy, or, like it's a protective place. And actually to open ourselves up to the joy and the sorrow is vulnerable. And one of the things from working so deeply with Archbishop Tutu for all those years is you see, how easily he laughs and how easily he cries. And I think, it's almost like, a dial where you can either turn down the joy, the sorrow, but you turn down the joy as well. Or like these two men, you turn up the joy and the sorrow, and you see the kind of intensity of feeling that they have. The Dalai Lama, Paul Ekman once told me that, the Dalai Lama has the most, kind of vivid micro expressions of anyone he's ever experienced. And, he kind of has this profound empathy where he takes in another person's state of being, but then it's gone, like next moment he's able to transition. And I think it's almost like this, part of, I think what makes them like these kids is that you see them being able to transition from joy to sorrow to joy to sorrow without the second arrow of suffering, of clinging to that sense of pain from the last moment.
Yeah, and all of that conversation brings me to a question that I'd love to pursue or hear you pursue. Peggy, I've heard you say that we have agency over our joy. And that's something that I think eludes a lot of people. Indeed, on one level, I watched the film and I thought, oh, what an amazing gift this friendship was, sort of the cosmos bestowing this friendship and bestowing upon each of these amazing human beings a nature that seems just inclined toward exactly what you were just saying, Doug, the ability to dial up or dial down both the joy and the suffering, but the simultaneity of it all that seems to rise in them, unlike it does in people. I remember vividly what it was like for me to be in profound clinical depression and feel unable to dial up or down anything. I was just stuck. So I'd love to hear you both talk about the kind of agency, how you understand agency over our joy, because I think any clues you can give us would be helpful to a lot of folks.
Great. Peggy, did you want to jump in or shall I? What would you like?
Well, why don't you go first? And I think we sometimes describe it differently. So you go and then I can describe how I see it or how I took it from them.
Yeah, well, so Parker, I want to say, and for everybody out there who, 40% of people in the world right now are experiencing symptoms of anxiety and depression, right? Our whole kind of biosphere, our whole human organism is in grief and challenge, right? And so I want to say that what we're talking about here is different than clinical depression. And one of the things that Andrew Solomon, one of the great writers on depression, his book, when I had a privilege of interviewing him for the Book of Hope, explained to me is that sorrow is grief that is proportional to the circumstance. Depression is grief that is not proportional to the circumstance. So, so setting aside, the clinical realities and that often need a different kind of support and structure. In terms of our daily experience of life, I think one of the things that they do remind us is that there is choicefulness in our state of being. And that, when they say joy is a choice, it's like, it is a kind of orientation of the mind. It's a perspective. It's a way of approaching life and choosing how one will respond. It's a response, right? I mean, the freedom comes between the stimulus and the response. And life is the stimulus, and then we have that momentary, sometimes so quick it's hard to even separate that there's, but the practices, the joy practices that they do in their lives, I think are about expanding that moment of choicefulness, and that ability to respond to life, not in just a habituated automatic way. So I think that's, and the last thing I'll say though is Archbishop Tutu was very adamant about, and this was one of the really interesting things, as you may remember in the film, about their kind of disagreements about how much control you have over your response. And Archbishop Tutu was very clear about, we need not make people feel guilty, because our human emotions, fear, anger, and sadness, the other three fundamental emotions that we have in addition to joy, they're just part of our humanity and our experience, and they are going to arise. And we can't, add guilt to fear, anger, and sadness by them coming, and our sometimes inability to shift out of them. They were just saying, don't set up your house there. Don't live there. Let it come, let it go, transition out of it, and recognize that you have some agency, some ability. And, this was a really interesting debate in the film of the Dalai Lama was quite saying that, if you do your meditative practices, if you do the disciplines, you actually will fall less into fear, anger, and sadness. And then Arch came and said, yes, but even still, then you sometimes will. And then it's about how do you traverse it and get to the other side.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know that there's anything left to say after that, Doug. That was really great. I will say this little tiny bit of it, though, that there's no doubt, well, especially if the Dalai Lama actually believed in hell, that, they both have been to hell and back many times, right? They might have had condos there for a while. And still, they are saying to all of us, we do have some agency over this. We can do some things about it. And they go through and they tell you some of the things that they did in the film. It's like perspective and gratitude and kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. Now, in the book, many more things are covered. And in the Big Joy Project, where we're doing science around joy, many more of these are covered. But they're saying we don't have to wait for joy to light on our shoulder and kiss us on the cheek. That's not the way it works. Yeah, it's like any kind of muscle. Joy is a muscle, and we can exercise that muscle. And the big debate in the film really was around emotions and how we respond to them. And I think the Dalai Lama, well, maybe all of you would agree with this. The Dalai Lama's response time is like that. I think that's what happens when you meditate 3 or 4 hours a day, right? You can do this pretty fast. And I think Arch allows time to feel it all more deeply. I don't know, more deeply. And there's, both of those are great options. I mean, they're wonderful. How do we practice joy ourselves? What works best for us?
Well, I think, one of the things we see in the film in terms of Archbishop Tutu's responses is how deeply enmeshed he is in society and feels the pulse of what people are going through, because I think it's exactly as Doug was describing. First of all, we tend to confuse joy with pleasure and think that this is a project to only feel pleasure all the time, which is crazy. It's never going to happen. And the more we have a distorted view of reality, the worse off we are. It will never be that we have only pleasure in this crazy life, as it changes and goes up and down and all the things we can't control. and so on. But going back to what I was trying to say earlier, it's like, it's the approach, it's the holding environment, it's what we might be adding to the space. Like, are we adding shame? Are we adding that sense of isolation? Do we feel we are part of a community as we are struggling? Do we feel held? Can we let in the help coming toward us? There's so many questions about how we are relating to what might be terrible thing that makes such a huge difference in our whole experience. And I would, bet anything that, of course, is what they're referring to when they talk about joy. And, I was once interviewed by this journalist and she said, no one likes the word happiness anymore. It's all about joy. And I said, I'm sorry to hear that. I think I have 4 books with the word happiness in the title. It's really too bad. It's now passe and unattractive. But it doesn't matter what you call it. It's that knowing inside. And I think it is controversial. Do we have agency? Can we do anything? But that's really the confusing it with pleasure, I think.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Sharon. And I think that part of the distinction, obviously in the film and the book about joy and happiness is that so much, happiness is a great word still, and we should, but we often think of happiness as some state of being that we're going to achieve. Whereas joy, I think, does give us this recognition that it's something that comes and goes and that we can access. And I do think that, when you said so beautifully that Archbishop Tutu was so embedded in the world, and, they talk about our greatest joy is our connection with one another. It's our shared humanity. It's our relationships. I mean, you see it in their relationship with one another. And, I just have to tell you, I was asked Archbishop Tutu after the dialogues, and I said, look, your sense of, humor, which is one of the 8 pillars of joy that they talk about. And they said, your humor, it's this, it's not this cutting or critical humor. He said, it's this kind of raising up humor. And he said, yeah, it's kind of like, stand next to me and we'll laugh at me and then we'll laugh at you. Yeah. And really it's about laughing at, our shared humanity. Like I worked with a shaman once who said, you can laugh or you can cry. The laughing just feels better. But it's really, it's all in the human response to the realities of being embodied on this planet. It's all part of the curriculum. It's not, as you said, it's not about some unending yoga class about pleasure where, that would be Shavasana, that would be the corpse pose, right? In this reality, we experience the full catastrophe, to talk about to reference one of our colleagues. And I think it's, what they're just offering us is, given the extraordinary opposition and oppression and crises and pain that they've experienced, how do you hold on to that humanity? And I think the last thing I'll just say about this is that, it's like Viktor Frankl's, our final freedom is our perspective towards life, right? Don't let the autocrats, the fascists steal your joy as well as your other freedoms, right? I mean, that is part of the human defiance. Like in South Africa, Archbishop Tutu did not let the apartheid state steal his humanity, his joy in the oppression. The Dalai Lama has not allowed, the Chinese invasion of Tibet and the oppression of the Tibetan people to steal that humanity and that joy. And I think that's an incredibly powerful teaching, which is that we need to remember that is part of our final freedom, and that we must hold on to as we recognize our interdependence and our work together to heal our collective.
Yeah, this is so rich. I've often thought that friends can do a couple of things without feeling threatened that really are hard to do in non-friendship relationships. One is just be quiet together without thinking, oh my God, something's going off the rails. You know, you can sit in the same room reading a couple of books or just staring out the window without feeling that silence is a threat somehow, which happens in other social situations. And the other thing is they can laugh at themselves and each other without any sense of threat. So that these powerful marks of friendship are one of the things that came to me as I watched the film. I'm very intrigued if we can return for just a moment to what you said, Doug, about that, about expanding the space between the experience and the feeling that comes. Because this is something that Sharon's work has gifted me with, is a growing capacity to expand that space. And I guess the image I use is to make choices, back to agency, about where in my inner landscape I'm going to stand as I move toward the world. Am I going to stand in a place of fear or anger or some other form of reactivity? Or am I going to stand in a place of goodwill and hope, another word that looms large, I think, in your work and in the film. There's this moment in the film that I'd love to hear about from both of you that really struck me. That they're exploring their life journeys, and I think woven in with the question of suffering. And the Dalai Lama speaks about his exile from Tibet and totally reframes it as a liberation from having to grow up in a gilded palace and the narrowness of that world, the world that he was born into and chosen for, in order to embark on a journey of learning, global learning, encounters with many people and many cultures and adventures of many sorts. And it's very clear that this reframing has also allowed him to say, I haven't suffered, I've benefited, I've gained. At least that's how I received it. And as Bishop Tutu listens to that and responds to that, what I saw in his body language and even in some of his words was, but wait, exile is hard, you know, exile is hard. And as I think Peggy said earlier, let's dwell there for a moment. There's this Christian scripture that has been influential for many about Mary pondering these things in her heart. And for Christians who are sort of drawn in a contemplative direction, it's that pondering that matters. And you see Bishop Tutu wanting to ponder, whereas the spirituality that has shaped the Dalai Lama takes him no, we can just reframe and move on with our lives. That notion comes up several times in the film. And from where I sit, it does seem quick. You know, I'm more inclined to ponder these things in my heart before I move on. So I'd love to hear you comment on that force field. Did I miss something in the movie, or?
He came back. Arch actually, if you watched all the raw tape and listened to the entire conversation, he came back to that a few times. Like, but wait a minute, you were forced into exile. You got turfed out of your country. What could be worse than that? And that is not to say that Arch himself is not a great person at perspective and reframing. So he reframed constantly about things in his life. But when His Holiness did it about going into exile, that just caught right with Arch, which was interesting to see. And he did want to explore it more. And like you, I think I am more inclined to, wait a minute, let me it just takes me longer to work through that and get to that place of equanimity, right? Or trying to, or seeing the positive side. And at first I was a little doubtful, really. But Dalai Lama can do it that fast? Really? Just like, but we don't know how fast it really is.
Right.
Yeah, we don't know what's going on during all those other hours. I suspect he's lightning fast compared to, I know he's lightning fast compared to me because I really try, but I'm not in, it's like, I can't convert that fast, that's for sure.
It's also, I think, he's had 50 years to, come to perspective on his exile. And so I think that his, even still, it's staggering to take what is, the greatest cataclysm of the Tibetan people, and certainly his own incredible hardship and pain, and to be able to transform that into a source of benefit and transformation. And I think, the first pillar of joy that they gave us was perspective. And it was this recognition that when you focus exclusively on the heartache and the heartbreak of your experience, whether that's your personal experience or the world, that's all that you see. But if you stand back and you take that wider perspective, which is part of what he was doing there, as seeing the large sweep of his life, of the Tibetan people's reality, and then see the opportunity that it can give you. I mean, one of the most personal, profound experiences of this was when my dad fell down a flight of stairs and had a traumatic brain injury and was, kind of delirious for a month, and we didn't know if he was coming back. And we just actually today got the framed photo from my family's house, which was on the wall where the blood stain of his head hitting the wall was. And we were just, and my brother said to him, how I'm so sorry you've been through this horrible experience. And he turned to my brother and said, "Oh, no, not at all. It's all part of my curriculum." And I think that, it's kind of what you were saying, Sharon, about, like if we can, it's not meant to be, like, I think the resentment is we feel like it should be other than it is. One of the other pillars is acceptance. And I think that, we feel like, the world shouldn't be so filled with conflict. It shouldn't be so filled with hate. It shouldn't be so filled with all the things that we lament and and I think, that's what happens in a universe where matter differentiates, like where there is polarity. And so but the work is not, acceptance is not acquiescence. It's not to say, that's the way it is and will always be. As two of the greatest activists in the world of the 20th century plus, they remind us that it is about accepting the reality and the pain and the suffering as it is, and then working through compassion to try to lift it up and realize our potential to make it otherwise.
I was going to say something very similar to how you began, Doug, in that, the Dalai Lama has been practicing this particular one for about 50 years, which brought me to something, Peggy had referenced about how he meditates, which is his practice or part of his practice, 3 or 4 hours a day. And one of the things I loved about this whole project is how actionable it is. There's so much of our conditioning also that has us admire others, and kind of leave ourselves out of the possibility of growth or change or connecting, whatever it is that we actually yearn for. And yet here it is. It's like, okay, here's a little exercise you can do, but you have to do it. And maybe you have to do it every day, or whatever the science is showing us these days. And then the change is real, then it's possible for you. So I don't know anything about Bishop Tutu's rituals or the way he practiced, and if you could say something about both the intention, which was clearly there to have this be actionable, have this be exercises, and just what you know of what they did every day.
So, Peggy, shall I field that one, or did you want to?
Sure.
It was funny because they teased each other, actually. Arch, the Dalai Lama apparently meditates 5 hours a day, and Archbishop Tutu meditates and prays, mostly prays, 4 hours a day. So Arch was teasing the Dalai Lama that, 5 hours is just too much, way, way, way too much, I think that what they gave us was they gave us, in the book, we include their joy practices, and Peggy can talk about the Big Joy Project, which gives people access to some of those online. It really was in these 8 pillars of joy, like, how do you work on developing your perspective? How do you develop your capacity to for acceptance, for forgiveness, for generosity. As Sharon, meditation is this, it's like meditation and prayer are kind of almost two coins, sides of the same coin. Parker, as you may have, in your world, I'm sure that people say, kind of prayer is where you speak to, God, and meditation is where God answers, where she answers you, it's this kind of dialogue with whatever you understand to be that transpersonal realm. So I think, it was funny that we actually got the opportunity to go into the Dalai Lama's meditation room with him, with Archbishop Tutu, which was this incredible privilege, and, kind of very, very, people who have worked with him for decades had never been in there. And the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu were kind of sharing their practices with each other. So Arch obviously was sharing the Christian Eucharist with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama, sticks his little pinky into the chalice and says, because he's not allowed to drink, and so, but he wants to participate in the ritual, and Archbishop Tutu says, well, we're still not going to let you drive after you drink and drive, and so they're teasing each other, sharing their practices, and the Dalai Lama starts off with sharing a practice about how he wakes up every morning and sees his identity dissolve, and a death meditation. It was like seeing these two kind of contemplative Olympians going, and the Archbishop Tutu was like, wow, you kind of like that, you go there that quick, but I think what they tell us, is, if you want to be the Dalai Lama or Desmond Tutu, that's 4 or 5 hours a day is great, but for the rest of we mere mortals, even a few minutes a day, even kind of building in some of these practices into our life, is really very profound, very powerful, and expands that pause. There's this story about how I saw Arch in that pause, but we don't have time for it. But if we could come back to it another time at one of our, if we get a chance to talk again.
You guys, one of the things that I think we all need to recognize, if we do want to practice these things, if we do want to build this in our lives, is it's not airy-fairy. You need to schedule it, right? You need to make a commitment. And most anyone who knows anything about the Dalai Lama knows that he's out of sight by 6 o'clock at night. Do you remember when he won the Nobel Peace Prize? He was in bed. It was like they found out at 9, and his team was like, should we go wake him up? Should we go wake him up? He was like, no, no, we'll just tell him in the morning. He was still over 1 in the morning. So, he's known for a really strict schedule around meditation. And perhaps Arch is not as well known, but people who've worked with him will say that everything was scheduled around quiet time. He would block in quiet time first, and anyone who was scheduling him had to deal with that. And so he preserved the time as equally ferociously, I think, or steadfastly, how about that? Steadfastly as the Dalai Lama did. And I think we all need to do that.
One of the things that came to me during the film that I think is related here is how much I, at least, and I think I can say we more generally, need sort of both styles, both perspectives, both ways of coming to these things that are represented by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. I was very struck at another moment in the film when a clearly suffering, weeping young girl, grade school girl, was in front of both the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu and started breaking down as she described her own exile from Tibet. The Dalai Lama's response was, "You should look at it this way." Bishop Tutu's response was this mask of shared grief and the words, "Sorry, I'm so sorry," something of that sort. So people will have to be there to appreciate the scene, and we can't take them there right now. But I guess I'd be glad for your comment on it, but I just want to affirm that there are times when I need a teacher who says, "You should look at it this way. You should do this." When, for example, I've had it with new learning experiences, please turn off the opportunities to reframe this as a learning experience. The whole thing sucks. I need a teacher who can say, "You should look at it this way." And then I need a teacher who can say, "I'm so sorry. Let me give you a shoulder to cry on." Don't have any words.
I love the way Jimpa, the Dalai Lama's translator, talked about it as one of them, of Archbishop Tutu giving comfort and the Dalai Lama giving courage. And I think that it's a power, what many people miss in the scene is you have to remember that, the Tibetan people are in the midst of oppression. And so, sometimes you need comfort and sometimes you need courage. And you need both. And sometimes in the experience of trauma, you need to survive it. And at the same time, on reflection, as you said, pondering it in one's heart, there needs to be comfort and tenderness. And so there's both. And I think they do give those two perspectives in a really powerful way that, as you said, we need both of them.
Yeah.
And I bet they both offer both at different times. Like we're watching a unique circumstance where they have one another.
Right. Exactly.
And sort of like one can cover one and the other can cover the other. But I'm sure there are many times when, even if it's just the look in their eye is saying one thing, like there's more than this, there's possibility, or you're not alone. But their words are saying, I'd pick yourself up if I were you and do something. And we want both. I think as human beings, we want that comfort and love and acknowledgement. And sometimes we really want the perspective as well.
Exactly. And to have the courage to keep going.
And I think, on the user end, we all need to have agency about seeking that diversity of sources, exposing ourselves to that diversity of learning styles and teaching styles and opportunities. It's too easy there, as in so many places in life, to stay in our own silo. And I think the film was helpful to me in that regard. Well, awesome. Sharon, do you want to, I think we're approaching perhaps the end of our hour. It's 4 after the hour. I think we started at about 10 after. If I'm not wrong about that, do you want to lead a meditation that will help us hold all of these things and ponder them in our hearts?
I'll try. And also I would like to bring Peggy back at some point and have her describe in more fullness access to the film and the project, which seems to me so important for us to realize, wow, that's there. That's something I can actually put to use.
Well, maybe that comes first.
Okay, so why don't we do that?
You all, I don't know if you can hear it. There's people outside doing yard work, not in our yard. So maybe you could do the meditation first and give them a chance to get away. I don't know if you can hear it. It seems really loud.
We can't hear it, Peggy.
You can't hear it?
No.
All right, then. If that changes, let me know. The great thing that we get to work on now is sharing not only the film with their story in it and their inspiration and their laughter, but we're also actually operationalizing many things that come out of the film. So number one, in terms of seeing the film, you could go to missionjoy.org and see where it is around the world. And I was going to say tonight, but I think they can take this out. Tonight, it's going to be on Facebook around the world with people who have 230 million followers. So it's a great experiment to get this message out there. And in North America, it's going to be on Amazon, iTunes, Google, Voodoo on the 9th of June. So that's coming up very quickly. And overall, you can have community screenings. You can ask for a screening of the film on our website, and we can make that happen for you. And then finally, what we're doing with this to operationalize a little more is we worked with UCSF, Berkeley, Harvard, several schools, and great scientists around the world to create something called the Big Joy Project, which you can do for free on the site of Berkeley. And what it does, it takes 7 minutes a day for 7 days. And you find out the kind of acts of joy that really work for you. Is it laughter, awe, gratitude, kindness, all of those kind of reframing, activism, all of those things can go into it. And at the end of the week, you'll get what works for you. It's a printout. This is really good. And this is what you might try to nurture even more. And it expands science. So you're helping yourself and science as scientists learn how culture and gender and age plays into joy. And that's at, you can go to missionjoy.org/big joy, or just come to the site and you can find it. We can help you find it.
Thank you so much. It's a beautiful, beautiful project, every element of it, and certainly including this film. So
thank you.
It's very exciting. So why don't we sit together, and what I'm going to ask you to do is we'll rest our attention on something like the feeling of the breath, and then just see what comes up for you as a joyful moment, something you feel grateful for. It may be very seemingly small. Someone thanked you or recognized you or held open a door for you, whatever it might be, but just to take that in. Okay, so you can start just by resting your attention on something like the feeling of the breath, something that's happening anyway. It's a way of gathering all of our energy, our attention into the moment, to being present in a relaxed and easy way. So much of our attention tends to go toward what's wrong, where we've blown it, we've made a mistake, how we're not being seen, whatever it might be. So let's just pivot. We're going to use intention to open up. Like, what else happened today beside that miserable thing? It's not denying the difficulty or pretending it's not there, but let's get bigger. to also include what might get very little airtime, but is also true. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank
Doug.
you very much, Sharon.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And Peggy.
And on behalf of the team, we want to express, and the community want to express our deepest gratitude to our speakers, Peggy and Abram. It's been wonderful, and our hosts, Sharon and Parker. We're deeply grateful. And one more time, I would love to ask our audiences, if you have not seen the movie, please go watch it. It is amazing and thought-provoking, and I think it's what humanity needs right now. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it and share it. Let's amplify this wonderful message that humanity needs right now. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.